We know him as the man who brought down an empire, a leader who moved millions of people and reshaped history, all without picking up a single weapon. It is easy to assume that someone who achieves this scale arrived with a pre-built reservoir of courage. We often imagine these figures are destined for greatness from the day they are born. But in 1869, in the coastal town of Porbandar, Mohandas was born into a household where life moved slowly and quietness was the default. As he grew, there were no signs of a future icon. He was known mostly for his intense shyness. Which leaves us with a question. How does a timid child sitting quietly in a small town build the capacity to one day break a global empire? Young Mohandas was not a natural public speaker. In fact, he actively avoided attention. Whenever a room was crowded, he was usually the person trying to stay in the background. Instead of speaking, he watched, and the person he watched most closely was his mother, Putlibai. She was a woman defined by deep religious devotion and a strict daily practice of self-discipline. Mohandas didn't learn about resilience through lectures. He absorbed it simply by watching his mother execute her routines, day after day, without exception. His future strength did not rely on extroverted bravery. He found his early power in internal commitment, a capacity to master oneself, forged in domestic quietness. Beyond his household, traditional storytelling began to anchor his view of the world. One story in particular gripped him, the ancient tale of King Harishchandra. It was the story of a man who chose to endure immense personal suffering for one single reason: he refused to abandon the truth. For a young boy reading by lamplight, this ancient tale offered a blueprint. Truth stopped being a suggestion and became a non-negotiable rule he applied to his own life. Decades later, the world would see him use satyagraha, the force of truth, to challenge British rule. But that method was first tested right here, in the mind of a child sitting beside a flickering oil lamp. As he grew into a teenager, his family moved to Rajkot. He continued his formal education within these stone walls, remaining a largely unremarkable student. He was far from a flawless prodigy. He was gripped by ordinary teenage anxieties, struggled with his confidence, and made his share of human mistakes. What set him apart was his response to those failures. He began treating his own flaws like a process. Make a mistake, recognize it clearly, learn why it happened, and actively improve. That cycle of radical self-accountability was the engine of his legacy. Character is not something he was born with. It was constructed, piece by piece, out of corrected failures. By 1888, the 18-year-old Mohandas stood on the precipice of adulthood. He prepared to leave India to study law in England. He was trading the familiar customs of a small coastal town for the massive, alien environment of Victorian London. When he stepped onto that ship, he was a law student carrying a suitcase. The massive protests and the eventual title of Mahatma were still a lifetime away. His story suggests that history is not reserved for the flawless. True, lasting power begins with the quiet, everyday choices of ordinary people who pursue the truth and choose to learn from their own humanity.